The galaxy trembled under the iron grip of the Tyrants, a coalition of alien overlords who ruled with terror and manipulation. Their combined forces stretched across 1,000 star systems, and their power was absolute. They commanded vast fleets, controlled entire populations, and obliterated any who dared to resist their authority. Humanity, once the most powerful race in the galaxy, had been reduced to a scattered, oppressed minority. Whole colonies of humans were enslaved, forced into grueling labor on mining worlds, or subjected to cruel experiments in the name of peaceful subjugation. The once proud human empire was nothing more than a memory, wiped from the history of the stars. Yet, despite the overwhelming power of the Tyrants, a faint whisper of rebellion stirred in the darkness. Secretive cells of resistance fighters formed across the galaxy, operating in the shadows, attacking Tyrant supply lines, and freeing captured slaves when they could. But their efforts were fragmented, their resources limited, and their chances of success seemed slimmer with each passing day. The Tyrants' surveillance networks were vast, their enforcers efficient, and their military machines seemingly unstoppable. No one could challenge the system, or so it seemed. On the mining moon of Xylon 7, Kalen, a young human scavenger, fought to survive in a world of endless toil. The Tyrants had turned Xylon 7 into one of their most profitable slave worlds, extracting resources at a pace that left the planet's surface barren and desolate. Kalen had never known freedom. Born into the pits of the mining colony, he had learned early on that survival meant hard work, unwavering obedience, and never questioning the orders of the overseers. The thought of escape had always felt like a fantasy, a dream too distant for someone like him. But fate had other plans. Kalen had witnessed countless atrocities in his short life. The brutal executions of workers who failed to meet quotas, the disappearances of those who spoke out against the Tyrants, the endless suffering of his fellow humans. He had grown numb to it all. Until one day, everything changed. It started as a murmur, a rumor whispered between the miners, a story that spread like wildfire through the underground tunnels. A group of resistance fighters had infiltrated the facility. At first, Kalen thought it was just another tale to offer some semblance of hope. But then, he heard the unmistakable sound of explosions. The slave camp erupted in chaos. Sirens wailed as armed Tyrant enforcers stormed the mining complex, their weapons crackling with deadly energy. Soldiers clad in black armor moved swiftly through the labyrinthine corridors, hunting down the rebels with ruthless precision. But the resistance fighters were well prepared. They fought with desperation, using every tool at their disposal to disable the Tyrants' high-tech weapons and disrupt their communication systems. Kalen was caught in the middle of it all. At first, he had no idea what to do, paralyzed by the violence around him. But then, something inside him snapped. For the first time, he saw a flicker of hope, not in the form of an army, not in the form of overwhelming firepower, but in the defiance of those who refused to bend to the Tyrant's will. He had to move. With his heart pounding in his chest, Kalen darted through the shadows, evading the enforcers as the resistance pushed forward. His mind raced, his instincts taking over as he navigated the burning wreckage of the facility. The Tyrants had always controlled every aspect of his life, from his work to his thoughts. But now, for the first time, he tasted freedom, the thrill of action, the rush of possibility. As he sprinted through a narrow service tunnel, Kalen stumbled upon a hidden chamber, one that had been sealed off and forgotten by the guards. The walls were lined with strange symbols, and at the center of the room, atop a pedestal, lay a small spherical artifact. Its surface shimmered with an otherworldly glow, a subtle hum emanating from it as though it resonated with some unseen energy. Compelled by something he couldn't explain, Kalen reached out and touched the orb. The moment his fingers made contact, a surge of raw power coursed through his body, electrifying every nerve. His vision blurred, his senses heightened. He could hear the distant voices of the rebels, feel the pulse of the galaxy itself, as though the artifact had awakened something deep within him. Before he could process what had just happened, A voice crackled over the comms in his earpiece. "Get out of there. Now." It was Lyra, the exiled princess of the Xylon people, and the leader of the resistance group. Kalen had met her briefly during his time in the slave camps, an intelligent and fierce woman with a hidden past. She had always spoken of the tyrant's cruelty with a quiet fury, but now there was an urgency in her tone. "Kalen, move. The tyrants are coming. We need you." For the first time, Kalen felt the weight of his decision. The orb pulsed in his hand, almost urging him forward. He wasn't just running from the tyrants. He was running toward something, the beginning of a revolution, the spark of humanity's redemption. With the artifact clenched tightly in his grip, Kalen raced toward the rendezvous point. Behind him, the sound of tyrant enforcers closing in grew louder. He had no idea what the orb truly was or what it would mean for his future, but one thing was clear. The chains of the tyrants were not unbreakable. Not anymore. The chaos of the mining camp was overwhelming. Kalen sprinted through narrow corridors, adrenaline coursing through his veins, the orb still pulsing in his hand. The sounds of battle, gunfire, explosions, the screams of soldiers and rebels alike, echoed off the metal walls. The resistance fighters were pushing the tyrants back, but it was clear they weren't going to escape unscathed. Kalen could feel the weight of the moment, as if every step he took was leading him toward something far greater than he could understand. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burning fuel and ozone, and the flashes of bright explosions illuminated the otherwise dim passageways. He rounded a corner and nearly collided with a pair of rebels hauling crates of explosives. They barely noticed him in the frenzy of their mission, their eyes locked on the task at hand. But one of them looked up briefly, his eyes widening as he recognized Kalen. "Kalen, what the hell are you doing here?" The rebel's voice was tense, his brow furrowed in disbelief. "I'm not staying behind," Kalen said, voice urgent. "I need to get to the rendezvous point. The tyrants are coming, and I got something they'll never expect." The rebel hesitated for a second, eyes flicking to the orb in Kalen's hand, but there was no time for questions. He nodded and motioned for Kalen to follow. "Good luck then," the rebel said before dashing off, disappearing into the smoke and the fire. Kalen continued on, driven by a sense of urgency he couldn't explain. As he reached a junction leading to the outer escape tunnels, he saw Lyra waiting for him at the entrance, her figure a sharp contrast against the flickering firelight. She was surrounded by a small group of rebels, all heavily armed and on high alert, ready for whatever was to come. "Kalen, thank the stars you made it," Lyra called out, her eyes scanning the shadows, ever watchful. Her usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by a fierce determination. "We don't have long before the tyrants realize they've been outplayed." "Where's the rest of the team?" Kalen asked, breathless. "I thought they'd be here by now." "They're buying us time. The final charges are set," she said, her voice cool despite the urgency of the situation. "We don't have a minute to lose. We're getting you out, and we're taking that artifact with us." Kalen nodded, his heart hammering in his chest. He could feel the weight of the orb in his hand, heavier now, as if it were alive, urging him forward. He didn't know how, but he knew it was essential. The resistance had been fighting for years, maybe even decades, against the tyrants. But now, Kalen was holding something that could change everything. Lyra motioned for him to follow, and the small group moved through the tunnel quickly, the clanging of their boots on metal reverberating in the confined space. They made their way toward the surface, the distant sound of battle still echoing through the walls. It was clear the tyrants wouldn't let them go easily. As they neared the exit, Kalen's thoughts raced. He had grown up in the mines, always knowing that resistance was futile, that the tyrants had everything under control. But now, as they raced through these final tunnels, his perception had shifted. The idea of freedom, of fighting back, no longer seemed like a far-off dream. It felt tangible within his grasp, and he was at the heart of it. "We're almost there," Lyra whispered, her voice steady despite the chaos outside. "Stay close, Kalen. The escape shuttle is just ahead." But no sooner had she spoken than a blast shook the tunnel, sending debris crashing to the floor. The team spun around, weapons raised, ready to face whatever was coming. Kalen's pulse quickened. He could hear the distinct sound of tyrant soldiers marching toward them, their footsteps heavy and deliberate. They had been cornered. "We need to move. Now." Lyra barked, drawing her weapon. "Kalen, the artifact. If you can, get it to the shuttle. The rest of us will hold them off." Kalen hesitated for a fraction of a second, the weight of her command settling on him. He didn't want to leave them, but there was no time to argue. The orb was the key, and the mission had to succeed. Without another word, he dashed toward the exit, his breath ragged, his senses sharper than ever before. He could feel the energy of the orb growing stronger as he ran, as though the very air around him vibrated with its power. It was calling to him, pulling him forward, and Kalen instinctively knew that he was destined for something far beyond mere survival. He emerged into the light, the cold winds of the surface cutting through him like a sharp blade. The escape shuttle was waiting for them, its engines running. As he approached, he saw the shuttle's hatch open, and the pilot, a grizzled veteran of the resistance named Soren, looked up from his controls. "Kalen, we don't have much time," Soren shouted, his voice strained. "Get aboard." Kalen hesitated for a moment, glancing back at the tunnel, where Lyra and the others fought to hold off the tyrants. But then the orb pulsed again, more urgently this time, and Kalen made his decision. He dashed for the shuttle, leaping aboard just as the hatch slammed shut behind him. The engines roared to life, and the shuttle shot into the sky, breaking through the atmosphere and into the stars. Kalen pressed his hand against the window, looking down at the moon they had just escaped from. He had been a prisoner here all his life, but now, as he looked ahead, he saw nothing but possibility, a future without chains. Behind him, the tyrants were beginning to realize the danger that Kalen and the resistance posed. But it was too late. The fight had already begun. The shuttle soared through the vastness of space, leaving the moon of Xylon 7 far behind. Kalen sat in silence, staring out at the stars, his mind reeling. The chaos of the mining colony was still fresh in his thoughts, the sounds of battle, the faces of the fallen, and the frantic escape. But now, as the shuttle sped toward an undisclosed location deep within rebel territory, the weight of the moment settled on him. He had the artifact, the key to something far greater than anything he had ever imagined. But what was it? And how could it help the resistance? Soren, the veteran pilot, guided the shuttle toward an asteroid belt, where hidden bases of the rebellion lay dormant, out of the reach of the tyrant's prying eyes. Lyra sat beside Kalen, her eyes scanning the stars, her face set in a mask of concentration. She had led the rebels on countless missions, but even she knew that this time was different. Kalen's presence and the orb he carried were about to change the course of the war, but the question was how. "Do you know what it is?" Lyra finally spoke, her voice soft but insistent. Kalen looked down at the artifact in his hands. It was no longer just a piece of forgotten technology. It thrummed with energy, alive in his grip. The strange symbols on its surface seemed to shift and change with his touch, as though it was responding to his thoughts. He shook his head, unable to explain the sensations running through him. "I don't know. I don't understand it, Lyra. But I can feel it. It's like it's speaking to me." Lyra's eyes narrowed, and her gaze flickered from the orb to Kalen. There was something else in her eyes now. Curiosity, yes, but also a hint of fear. "You're not just carrying a weapon, Kalen. You're holding the key to humanity's lost power. Whatever that thing is, it was once humanity's greatest secret, hidden away for a reason." At her words, a chill ran through Kalen. He had known that the artifact was important, but this revelation sent a shiver down his spine. Could it really be the key to unlocking humanity's lost potential? Could it be the answer they had been searching for all these years? Before Callan could respond, the communication system on the shuttle crackled to life. Soren's voice came through, urgent, and clipped. "We've got company. Tyrant ships closing in fast." Callan's stomach dropped. He had barely escaped with his life from Cylon 7. And now the tyrants were on their tail. The thought of facing their wrath again made him sick with fear, but there was no turning back now. The rebellion had no choice but to fight. The stakes had been raised, and Callan was no longer just a bystander. He was a key player in the Resistance's war. "Damn it, they found us already." Lyra cursed, standing up and moving toward the cockpit. "Soren, how many?" "2 destroyers, 1 frigate. We won't outrun them on this shuttle." Soren responded quickly. "We're gonna have to fight, or we'll be sitting ducks." Callan stood, instinctively tightening his grip on the orb. His thoughts raced. He had never fought in a space battle before. He was just a scavenger, a worker in the mines. He wasn't a soldier. But as the shuttle jolted with the first blast from the pursuing tyrant ships, he realized he no longer had the luxury of being a bystander. The galaxy was at war, and he was at the heart of it. Lyra turned to him. "We're not alone, Callan. The rebels are gathering. But we need to buy time. That orb, it has power. If you can tap into it, maybe we can turn the tide." Callan didn't need to be told twice. He closed his eyes, focusing on the orb's hum, trying to reach deep within it, to understand its energy. It felt like a pulse in his chest, resonating with the very beat of the universe. He could feel its power growing, feeding off his own fear and determination. But it wasn't enough. He needed more. "Lyra, Soren," Callan said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "I need a direct hit on their shields. I think I can do something, but I need you to give me a clear shot." Soren nodded grimly, adjusting the shuttle's course. "I can make that happen, but you better be ready. We've only got 1 shot at this." As the tyrant ships closed in, Callan's mind raced. He could feel the orb growing more attuned to him, the energy building to a point where it seemed almost unbearable. It was a raw, primal force, and he realized then that the orb was not just a weapon. It was a conduit, a bridge between his will and the power that had once made humanity the most feared species in the galaxy. Soren's voice broke through his thoughts. "Now, Callan." The shuttle's weapons fired, striking the enemy frigate's shield. In that instant, Callan's mind locked onto the orb, and the world seemed to slow. He could see the enemy ship in its entirety, every weak point, every flaw in its design. Without thinking, he extended his hand, and the orb's energy surged through him, channeling his will into a single, focused strike. A beam of pure energy shot from the orb, slamming into the tyrant frigate's shield. The blast shook the ship to its core, sending shockwaves through the vacuum of space. The shield flickered, then shattered under the intensity of the attack. Callan could feel the shock of the power reverberating through his body, and for a moment, everything went silent. The tyrant ships were no longer a threat. The rebellion had a fighting chance. "Nice shot, Callan," Soren said with a grin, his voice full of awe. But Callan didn't answer. His thoughts were still reeling. He had tapped into something far greater than he had ever imagined. And now, there was no turning back. The aftermath of the battle felt surreal. The tyrant ships, though not completely destroyed, were severely damaged and forced to retreat into the depths of space. The rebels, though battered and exhausted, cheered in the shuttle's cockpit, their faces a mixture of disbelief and elation. They had won, against the odds, against an enemy that seemed invincible, and all because of Callan and the mysterious orb. Soren guided the shuttle toward their hidden base within the asteroid belt, where the rest of the resistance awaited. The air in the shuttle was thick with tension, but also something else: hope. Callan's heart was still pounding from the fight, the power of the orb still pulsing in his veins. He had done something extraordinary, something that should have been impossible for a mere scavenger. He had tapped into a force far beyond his understanding, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he had purpose. But the question lingered. What was this power? And why had it chosen him? Lyra leaned back in her seat, her eyes studying Callan with an intensity he wasn't accustomed to. She had seen many battles, led many missions, but the events of the last few hours had shaken even her resolve. The orb was not just an ancient artifact. It was something much more, and Callan was its bearer. "Callan, what you did, that wasn't just a lucky shot," Lyra said, breaking the silence. "That was the power of humanity's lost legacy. That orb, it's not just a relic. It's part of an ancient technology we didn't even know still existed." Callan frowned, trying to process her words. "What do you mean? What legacy?" Lyra's gaze softened, and she sighed, her voice lowering. "There are stories, old stories, passed down from the time before the tyrants came. Some believe they're myths, others think they're history. But one thing is clear. Humanity was once a force of nature, a species unlike any other in the galaxy. We had technology, knowledge, and power that could rival the stars themselves. But something happened, something that sent us into exile, that erased us from the records of the galaxy. The tyrants don't just want to control us, Callan. They want to erase every trace of who we were." Callan's pulse quickened as the weight of her words sank in. The tyrants had conquered the galaxy, obliterating civilizations and extinguishing species, all to maintain their dominance. But humanity was different. We had once been the apex, the rulers of the stars. And now, Callan was holding the key to that forgotten power. "This artifact is a piece of that legacy," Lyra continued, her voice steady but filled with awe. "The tyrants have been hunting for it for centuries. They know that if humanity ever regains its strength, their rule will crumble. And now, it's in your hands." Callan's mind raced. He had never thought of himself as anything special. He was just a miner, a scavenger scraping by in the shadows of a broken world. But now, with the Ord's power surging through him, he realized that he was more than that. The tyrant's oppression had crushed humanity, but Callan had the potential to lead them back from the brink, and the responsibility of that weight was almost too much to bear. As the shuttle neared the rebel base, Lyra turned to him again, her expression serious. "Callan, the Resistance is already planning its next move. We need to strike before the tyrants recover. We need to get the word out, rally more people to our cause. But to do that, we need more than just courage. We need the technology, the ancient power you've unlocked. We need you to understand it." Callan nodded, feeling the surge of determination. "I don't know how to control it," he admitted, "but I'll learn. I'll do whatever it takes to help." Soren's voice interrupted, cutting through the tension. "We're entering the base's perimeter. Prepare for landing." The shuttle docked inside the rebel station, a large asteroid converted into a bustling command center. Rebel fighters moved quickly, attending to their stations, checking weapons, and preparing for whatever came next. Callan stepped off the shuttle and was immediately greeted by a handful of officers, including Admiral Corvin, a grizzled leader of the Resistance who had seen his fair share of battles. "Callan, good to see you made it," Corvin said, his tone rough but friendly. "We've been hearing stories about what you did out there. Impressive, to say the least." Callan didn't know how to respond. "It wasn't just me," he said. "The team, the Resistance, they fought just as hard." Corvin waved a hand dismissively. "You brought the power, Callan. Without that, we'd be dead in space right now. That artifact you've got, it changes everything." Lyra stepped forward, her voice urgent. "Admiral, we need to understand what we're dealing with. This power, it's beyond anything we've ever seen. We need to unlock its secrets." Corvin nodded, his face grim. "I've been studying the old texts. There are rumors of technology that could turn the tide against the tyrants, but we never thought it could still be out there. If we're going to win this war, Kalen, we need to understand that artifact. We need to harness it before they do. Kalen stood there, the weight of their expectations pressing down on him. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a leader. But the artifact in his hand whispered to him, a constant hum that seemed to speak directly to his soul. Somehow he knew that his journey was just beginning. "You'll help us, right?" Lyra asked, her voice soft, but filled with hope. Kalen looked down at the orb, then back up at her. "I will," he said, "for humanity, for the future." And with that, he stepped into the unknown, ready to unlock the power that had been hidden for so long. The war had only just begun, and Kalen would be its spark. The rebel base was abuzz with activity as Kalen walked through the hallways. He couldn't shake the sense of unease that lingered in the pit of his stomach. He had never intended to be the center of this conflict, but now, with the orb still pulsing in his hand, he couldn't deny that everything had changed. The Resistance's hopes were pinned on him, and he had no idea how he was supposed to live up to their expectations. Lyra walked alongside him, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Her presence was reassuring, and Kalen could feel her steadiness in the chaos that surrounded them. She had become a beacon of focus for the team. Yet even she seemed on edge, as though the weight of what they were about to undertake was finally sinking in. "You've done well so far, Kalen," Lyra said quietly, her voice barely rising above the hum of the bass. "But the next steps are going to be far harder." "I know," Kalen replied, his voice strained. "I don't understand how this power works. It's overwhelming." Lyra gave him a brief, understanding glance. "I'm not going to lie to you. The first time I encountered it, I was terrified too. But that power, it's not something you can control by force of will alone. It's not about mastering it. It's about learning to listen to it." They arrived at a large chamber, the heart of the rebel base, where holographic maps and ancient data terminals were scattered across the room. Officers and engineers worked tirelessly, trying to decrypt the secrets of the artifact. At the center of the room, an elaborate metal pedestal stood, designed to hold the orb securely. "This is the Crucible," Lyra explained as Kalen approached the pedestal. "It's an ancient device designed to interface with the artifact. We don't know all the details yet, but we think it's the key to unlocking its true potential." Kalen hesitated, unsure if he was ready to trust this strange technology. But the hum of the orb grew louder, as though it was urging him forward. He stepped toward the pedestal, carefully placing the orb into its center. As soon as the artifact made contact, the room seemed to tremble with energy. The holograms flickered, and the lights dimmed for a moment. A low, resonant sound filled the air, as though the very walls of the base were alive. "This is it," Lyra said softly. "Now we wait." For what felt like an eternity, nothing happened. The orb sat still, its surface glowing faintly in the low light. Kalen felt the pull of the artifact, but he didn't know how to answer it. He closed his eyes, concentrating on the sensations that had begun to rise within him. The orb was part of him now, almost as though it were a second heartbeat, its rhythm intertwined with his own. Suddenly, the orb flared to life, and a wave of energy surged through the room. Kalen staggered back, his body jerking involuntarily as the power from the orb coursed through him. It was not painful, but it was intense, a tidal wave of sensation that flooded his mind, leaving him breathless. He could see flashes of images, strange symbols, and vast landscapes stretching beyond the stars. A voice whispered in the depths of his mind, ancient and distant. "The time has come, child of humanity. The chain must be broken." The words echoed through his thoughts, and Kalen's heart skipped a beat. What was this? The voice seemed to be calling him, urging him forward. He could feel its presence, not in a tangible sense, but as a vast, invisible force that surrounded him, penetrated him, and somehow made him part of something far greater than he had ever understood. Kalen clenched his fists, trying to regain control. He couldn't lose himself in this power. Not now. He had a purpose. The orb wasn't just a relic. It was the key to the freedom of humanity. He had to understand it, to unlock its potential. "You can do this, Kalen." Lyra's voice cut through the fog in his mind. "Focus. You're not alone. Remember what you're fighting for." The words grounded him, pulling him back from the overwhelming tide of the orb's power. He took a deep breath and focused on the energy within him, trying to direct it, control it. The voice in his mind spoke again, this time clearer. "The legacy of humanity is bound by the chains of the tyrants. To break them, the one who carries the light must find the nexus." The words sent a shockwave through Kalen, and a vision flashed before his eyes. A massive structure, buried beneath a forgotten planet, a place of unimaginable power. The nexus. He saw it in vivid detail, as though it were right in front of him. The orb was the key to it, and once activated, it would lead Kalen to the heart of the tyrant's power. "The nexus," Kalen whispered, barely understanding the significance. "It's real." Lyra stepped closer, her expression a mixture of awe and concern. "What did you see?" Kalen stood still, his mind still racing with the vision. A place, a structure buried beneath a world lost to time. "It's called the Nexus. The orb is leading us there." Lyra's eyes widened, and for the first time, she seemed truly shaken. The Nexus. That's where the tyrant's power was born. It's where everything began. If we reach it before they do. Kalen nodded, determination setting into his features. "Then we'll break their chains." The power of the orb surged again, the energy growing brighter as the vision of the Nexus filled his mind. The path was set. The fight for humanity's future was about to enter its most dangerous phase. The atmosphere in the rebel base shifted after Kalen's vision. The air seemed charged with anticipation, every officer and engineer now aware of the stakes. The discovery of the Nexus was not just a breakthrough. It was a revelation that had the potential to reshape the entire war. The tyrants had long believed that their dominance was unchallenged, that their chains on humanity were permanent. But now, there was hope, a path that could lead to their downfall. "We need to prepare for a mission," Kalen said, his voice steady despite the overwhelming weight of what lay ahead. "The Nexus is on a planet that's been hidden for centuries. If the tyrants know about it, they'll stop at nothing to reach it first. We can't waste any time." Lyra nodded, her expression grim. "You're right. The Nexus is humanity's last hope. We can't afford to fail. But we need more than just a shuttle and a crew. We need the right intel, the right weapons, and a plan to make sure we survive long enough to get to the Nexus." Kalen turned to her, determination in his eyes. "What do we have?" "Not much," she admitted. "The location of the Nexus is buried deep within ancient records, and most of those records are locked away in tyrant-controlled systems. But we do have one lead, a former tyrant researcher who defected years ago. He may know more about the planet where the Nexus is located. We're going to have to track him down." Corvin, who had been silent up until now, spoke up. "We've heard rumors about this defector. His name is Dr. Eleron. He was part of a project to study ancient human technology. He might be our best shot at finding the Nexus before the tyrants." Lyra's gaze hardened. "If we find Eleron, we'll have a fighting chance. But it won't be easy. He's been in hiding for years, and the tyrants have no doubt been looking for him ever since he disappeared." Kalen felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The mission was becoming more complex by the minute. It wasn't just about finding the Nexus. It was about securing humanity's future. He had always thought of himself as a scavenger, someone who took what he could from the wreckage of the galaxy. But now, he was a key player in the fight for survival. The fate of billions rested on his shoulders. "Then we'll find Eleron," Kalen said firmly. "And we'll make sure the tyrants don't get there first." Over the next few hours, the Resistance rallied its forces. Pilots prepped their ships. Engineers worked tirelessly to ensure that the fleet would be ready for whatever awaited them. and strategists pored over every scrap of information they could gather about the planet Kalen had seen in his vision. Meanwhile, Kalen and Lyra were tasked with tracking down Dr. Aileron. They would need his knowledge of ancient technology if they had any hope of locating the Nexus and, more importantly, accessing its power. The location of Aileron's last known whereabouts was on a desolate moon, far from any major trade routes. It was a place where the Tyrants had no reason to look, a forgotten corner of the galaxy where only those who wished to remain hidden could survive. But that also meant the moon was barely charted, and it would take some time to get there. As Kalen prepared for the journey, the weight of the orb seemed to grow heavier in his hands. It was as if the artifact itself was urging him forward, pulling him toward the unknown. He had no idea what awaited him on this moon, but the vision of the Nexus. The structure hidden beneath a forgotten world haunted him. It was a place of unimaginable power, and if he and the Resistance could unlock its secrets, they could change the course of the war. But Kalen knew the Tyrants would do anything to stop them. They were already planning their next move, and they had a vast fleet at their disposal. Lyra joined him in the shuttle bay, her eyes full of resolve. She had always been the leader, the one who kept the rebellion focused. But now she was looking to Kalen for answers. "We're not just going to track down Aileron, Kalen," Lyra said, her voice quiet but resolute. "We're going to make sure the Tyrants never have the chance to control humanity again. We've waited too long for this moment." Kalen nodded, his resolve hardening. "We won't fail." As the shuttle lifted off from the rebel base, Kalen felt a strange calm settle over him. The stars stretched out before them, a vast ocean of possibilities. The journey to Aileron's hideout was only the beginning, and as the shuttle rocketed toward the desolate moon, Kalen knew that the next phase of the war was about to begin. Hours later, they arrived at the moon. A barren rock, pockmarked with craters and dust. There was no sign of life, no signs of civilization. It was as if the entire moon had been forgotten by the universe. But Kalen felt a strange pull as the shuttle descended. He couldn't explain it, but the orb was calling to him, as if it had sensed something hidden beneath the surface. "There," Lyra said, pointing to a jagged ridge in the distance. "That's where Aileron's last known coordinates were. Let's hope he's still there." Kalen's heart pounded in his chest. The search for the Nexus had begun in earnest, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The Tyrants weren't far behind. The shuttle touched down on the barren surface of the moon with a soft thud, its engines humming to a halt as Kalen glanced out the viewport. The landscape was desolate, endless stretches of gray dust, jagged rock formations, and craters that seemed to have no beginning or end. The planet's lack of life seemed almost eerie, an emptiness that whispered of secrets buried deep beneath its surface. The orb in Kalen's hand pulsed softly, as if recognizing something in the air, urging him forward. Lyra was already unstrapping herself from her seat, a look of determination etched on her face. "This is it," she said, her voice low. "We need to find Aileron before the Tyrants do. If they get to him first, we're finished." Kalen nodded, but his thoughts were distant. The closer they got to the source of the vision he had seen, the Nexus, the stronger the pull of the orb became. It wasn't just a piece of ancient technology anymore. It was a living thing, a force that communicated directly with him, urging him to follow a path he couldn't yet fully understand. The hatch opened, and Kalen stepped onto the cold surface of the moon, his boots crunching against the dust. The air was thin, and the weight of the silence was oppressive. No birds, no wind, no sign of life, just the constant hum of the orb in his hand, its glow faint but ever present. Lyra was already ahead of him, scanning their surroundings with her rifle slung across her back. She seemed unfazed by the solitude, her focus trained on their objective. They trekked across the barren landscape, a silence broken only by the sound of their boots and the distant hum of the shuttle's engines. The coordinates led them toward the jagged ridge Lyra had pointed out earlier. The closer they got, the more Callan could feel the power of the orb shifting, a strange vibration coursing through his body. It was as if the artifact was sensing with the very core of the planet. "There," Lyra said, pointing to a narrow crack in the rocks, hidden from view unless one knew where to look. It was barely wide enough to fit through, but Callan could feel the pull of the orb growing stronger as they neared. This was the place. Callan crouched down, placing his hand on the surface of the crack. It was cold to the touch, but as he concentrated, he felt the hum of the orb grow louder, as though it was interacting with something hidden deep within the stone. The air around him seemed to shimmer, and the ground beneath his feet vibrated with a low, resonant tone. He hesitated for a moment, then pressed harder, using the power of the orb to push against the barrier. The stone groaned and shifted, slowly parting to reveal an entrance. It was ancient, covered in intricate carvings that Callan didn't understand, but the orb responded to them, flashes of light rippling across the symbols as if they were alive. The pathway below was dark, but Callan knew they had no choice but to descend. "This is it," Callan said, glancing at Lyra. "The path to whatever Aileron discovered, and maybe the key to the Nexus." Lyra nodded, her face set in a firm line. "We stick to the plan. Find Aileron, get the information we need, and then we leave. Fast. No distractions." With that, they made their way into the tunnel, the darkness closing in around them. The air was thick and musty, filled with the scent of earth and metal. The walls were lined with ancient inscriptions, symbols that seemed to pulse with a forgotten energy. Callan's mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. It was like the very foundation of the galaxy's history was hidden here, tucked away beneath a moon long abandoned. As they moved deeper, the path became more complex, twisting and turning as if designed to confuse anyone who tried to navigate it. But the orb's hum was constant, a steady guide that pulled Callan forward with an almost magnetic force. The deeper they went, the more alive the place seemed to become, as though it had been waiting for them all along. After what felt like hours of winding through the labyrinthine tunnels, they finally reached a large chamber, its vastness taking Callan's breath away. In the center stood a massive stone pedestal, much like the one that had held the orb back at the rebel base, though this one seemed ancient beyond measure. It was surrounded by what appeared to be a series of inactive energy fields, dormant yet still humming with the potential of power. And there, sitting at the base of the pedestal, was a figure, a man, hunched and cloaked, as if waiting. "Aileron," Lyra whispered, a sense of relief washing over her face. "We found him." The figure slowly turned, his eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "You've come." His voice was raspy but filled with a strange sense of calm. "I knew you would." Callan stepped forward, his pulse quickening. "You're Dr. Aileron, right? We need your help. We need to know everything you know about the Nexus." Aileron's gaze lingered on Callan for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded slowly. "The Nexus. It's not just a place," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "It's the heart of all that was lost. And now, it's the key to everything. The Tyrants are already searching for it. You don't have much time." Callan felt the orb in his hand pulse harder than ever before. This was it. The truth, the final piece of the puzzle. The journey to the Nexus was about to reach its climax. The war, the legacy of humanity, and the future of the galaxy would all come down to this moment. The chamber was deathly quiet, save for the echo of Aileron's words lingering in the air. Callan's heart pounded in his chest, every muscle tense as the weight of the situation settled over him. The Nexus wasn't just a place. It was the heart of all the lost knowledge, the very foundation of the Tyrant's power. And now, it was within reach. Aileron had once been part of that world, and now he was humanity's last hope. "We don't have much time," Aileron repeated, his voice low and urgent. "The Tyrants are closer than you think. They'll stop at nothing to control the Nexus. If they get their hands on it, They'll wield a power unlike anything we've ever seen. You need to act fast. Kalen's grip tightened around the orb. The pulsing energy inside it grew stronger, and he could feel its power radiating from it like an electric current. There was no turning back now. The future of humanity rested on the choices they made in the next few moments. We can't let them reach it, Lyra said, her voice sharp with resolve. She stood at Kalen's side, her weapon still ready but her eyes locked on Aileron. Where is it? Where is the Nexus? Aileron's eyes gleamed with an unsettling knowledge. The Nexus is not a place. It's buried deep within the heart of the Tyrants' strongest world, a planet that has been erased from all maps, locked away in secrecy. I once helped them construct the defenses around it. The Nexus is hidden within their capital world, the true seat of their power. It's beneath layers of military defenses and shielded by their strongest weaponry. Kalen felt his mind spinning. This wasn't just a world they would have to infiltrate. This was a fortress, the very core of the Tyrants' empire. The odds were overwhelming. Then we'll get there first, Kalen said, his voice unwavering. We'll break through their defenses. Aileron nodded slowly. You're going to need help. I can guide you, but you'll need more than just the two of you. The Tyrants' forces are mobilizing, and they'll have reinforcements pouring in as soon as they detect you. We're used to impossible odds, Lyra said with a determined smile. Give us the intel, and we'll make it work. Aileron turned toward a console embedded into the stone walls of the chamber, his fingers flying over it. The faint glow of the screen illuminated his face as he accessed hidden data. The Tyrants have several fleets stationed near their capital, but they're focused on suppressing rebellions, not expecting a full assault. I'll show you the routes, the entrances that they've hidden, but you'll have to be fast. Kalen exchanged a look with Lyra. There was no more room for hesitation. Aileron had given them a map, but what lay ahead would be a gauntlet. The Tyrants had everything to lose. If they succeeded, humanity's freedom would be within their grasp. If they failed, the Tyrants would tighten their grip, extinguishing any hope for good. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and Kalen could feel the rumble of engines in the distance. The Tyrants were already here. We don't have much time, Kalen muttered. We need to move. Now. The trio hastily made their way out of the chamber, the air feeling colder as they approached the surface. The shuttle they had arrived in was the fastest way to get off the moon, but they had no idea what kind of opposition would greet them. Kalen had already felt the surge of power from the ore earlier, and now, as they climbed aboard the shuttle, he could sense that the artifact was reacting to the urgency of the situation. Its energy was stronger, more focused. It was as if it knew that the final confrontation was approaching. As the shuttle ascended, the planet below them began to disappear into the distance. The stars stretched out ahead like an endless sea of possibilities. But Kalen's focus was on the task at hand. The coordinates that Aileron had provided were burned into his mind. He knew that if they could make it through the Tyrants' defenses, the Nexus would be within their grasp, but there was no guarantee they would make it. I hope we're ready for this, Lyra said, her voice tense as she monitored their flight path. This is going to be the fight of our lives. Kalen turned to her, his expression determined. We've been fighting for this moment our entire lives. We won't let the Tyrants win. The shuttle sped through the void, crossing the boundary of known space and heading deep into Tyrant-controlled territory. As they approached the coordinates of the capital world, the first wave of Tyrant warships came into view, massive constructs designed to intimidate and destroy. The odds were stacked against them, but Kalen felt an unshakable certainty. The orb was with them, pulsing with a power that he couldn't fully understand but knew was crucial. With it, they could break the chains the Tyrants had forged around the galaxy. Steady, Lyra muttered, her hands gripping the controls. We need to get past their fleet before they can track us. Leave it to me, Kalen said, a strange calm washing over him. He placed his hand over the orb, feeling its energy surge through him. It was as if the entire universe was converging on this moment, and with every pulse of the orb, Kalen felt his connection to humanity grow stronger. The light of hope, however faint, was flickering brighter than ever. "This is our chance," Kalen whispered, his voice full of resolve. "Let's end this." The final battle for the Nexus had begun.